Hello, I'm Paul Zimmy Finn, and this is the Generation Report. As my listeners have probably sensed by now, I've been keeping a close eye on the news of the world as I've progressed through making new episodes. There are very few news items of a mostly cultural import which can move me to change the drafting and recording schedule with what amounts to an emergency podcast. When Bob Dylan releases his first new song in 8 years overnight, and it's an almost 17-minute-long opus about the assassination of President Kennedy, that can. Variety and Rolling Stone and the other usual suspects have already offered their thoughts on Murder Most Foul's musical arrangement and its lyrical references, so I'll take a different approach. Here, I'll briefly examine 3 elements which make the song noteworthy in a historical sense: the event the song invokes, the artist who wrote it, and the moment we are living through at its release. The volume of literature and films and poetry and music devoted to memorializing the day President Kennedy died sustains to this day, over half a century after the event. It's not hard to understand why. The assassination occurred at a time in history when America seemed to be astride the world, when confidence in our nation's institutions and hopes for a better future were both high. And it ended the administration and the life of a leader who, in so many ways, had come to embody the prestige, energy, and outlook America possessed at that time. Whether or not the assassination represents the paradise lost it has been memorialized as, the break November 22, 1963 represents in American history, politics, and culture is both sharp and inestimable. As it so happens, 1963 was also the year when a young folk singer, then all of 22 years old, came to national attention. His songs which made waves that year, in his studio recordings, in other artists' commercial releases, and in his own live performances, included Blowin' in the Wind, Masters of War, A Hard Rain's A Gonna Fall, Only a Pawn in Their Game, With God on Our Side, and The Times They Are A-Changin'. In a Washington Post profile which ran on August 18th of that year, that young singer's impact was summed up this way, quote, "His songs rage against a world dominated by the powerful and unscrupulous. The people of his songs are victims of a great omnipotent they, the bomb makers, the warmongers, the politicians, the segregationists, the rightists," unquote. To the era's nonconformists and conscientious objectors, to the protesters of the emergent civil rights movement, to millions of the like-minded and young, this folk singer's music spoke of a world which might one day see an end to war, racial injustice, and authoritarian control over the individual. Before summer's end that year, he would perform at the March on Washington and be anointed with the unofficial title, Voice of His Generation. That young folk singer was Bob Dylan. It has become part of the legend surrounding the 1960s, the assassination, and JFK himself that the 60s began on the fateful November 22nd. That is an exaggeration. In fact, the entirety of 1963 oversaw much more change, was much more tumultuous, and was much more violent than is typically remembered now. What the assassination changed, profoundly and permanently, was the mood of the country amid the social ferment then taking place. Although the event marks a very sharp distinction between the historical eras before and after, the year of 1963 was very much part of the 60s, as that term is commonly understood. It was within this distinct milieu of confidence and hope and tumult and tragedy in the period up to and including the assassination that Bob Dylan, through his music, emerged on the scene as a major cultural figure. Just as the fruit of summer emerges from the seeds of spring, cultural changes that sweep over a society during awakenings develop their roots in the highs which immediately precede them. All artists who followed Dylan's emergence over the rest of the 1960s, including the Beatles, worked within the template of authenticity, creativity, and conscience Dylan redefined just before the assassination sparked the awakening. For this reason, it is fitting that Dylan has written a song about the assassination, whether just after the event as a young man, or in his twilight more than half a century later. And in a way, it is poignant that that song in question should be released now, amid America's dark hour of crisis. For the arc of social and cultural individuation Dylan has left such a singular imprint upon has run its course. Consider the differences between 1963 and 2020 in light of where each year locates in the cycle of history. The overriding problem facing America today, transcending even a global pandemic, is not institutions which are too powerful, but institutions which cannot bring people together. The culture, which was ripe for new creative energy and fresh perspectives on social issues in 1963, has become stifled by opposing and uncompromising herd mentalities. And the individualism which was just emerging in 1963 expanded and extended to the point where it has left America's old order now, as Strauss and Howe foresaw in The Fourth Turning, seeming quote-unquote ruined beyond repair. For over 50 years, as America's greatest songwriter laments in Murder Most Foul, the assassination of President Kennedy has been memorialized as the event which, quote-unquote, tore away the quote-unquote soul of a nation. Now, as this song brings that tragedy into focus once more, America is persevering through a national trial of a different nature, with different implications for our future, but in its own way, no less significant. The time has come to restore our soul, as a nation, again. Maybe that's why Murder Most Foul has been released now. As America continues to persevere through this pandemic and this crisis era, inspirational words, from wherever or whomever they might be drawn, have great poignancy and power. Here are some verses I hope will resonate with you. From one of Bob Dylan's classic songs of 1963, When the Ship Comes In. A song will lift as the mainsail shifts and the boat drifts onto the shoreline, and the sun will respect every face on the deck the hour that the ship comes in. From JFK's undelivered Dallas speech. Where our strength and determination are clear, our words need merely to convey conviction, not belligerence. If we are strong, our strength will speak for itself. If we are weak, words will be of no help. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility, that we may exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint. The righteousness of our cause must always underlie our strength. For as was written long ago, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh, but in vain. Please tune in to the next episode. At long, long last, the breaking up of men and women in America. Thank you for listening, and stay safe.